Oh, wonderful, wonderful. So, Dana Klisanin, thank you very much for joining me today and welcome to the channel. So, I'm very grateful to have you here today. And it would be really fantastic and wonderful to learn more about you as an individual, who you are, maybe give us some story backline of what you've been doing, what you're doing right now, and why we're here today.
Thank you so much, and it's such a pleasure to be here today and to be able to have this conversation with you and whomever is listening, our listening audience. I am by profession a psychologist specializing in a sort of a niche area called transpersonal psychology, which sort of looks at things kind of beyond the ego. And I also happen to kind of found my way into futures studies, which is a vast field. And my expertise kind of lies at the crossroads between psychology and futures. So I'm often looking at the evolution of the psyche, maybe where we're headed. And one of my special focuses right now is looking at rewilding, which is kind of our return to nature, but in a contemporary way. So, and right now I'm an author. I just wrote a middle grade novel, which I look forward to talking to you about. But yeah, that's the summary.
Okay, let's rewind some time a little bit, maybe, and tell me something about your childhood. How was it for you to grow up as a child, teenager? Compare your times to today's times, younger generation. Do you think your times were better when you were younger than what youth experiences today in general?
Um, I think so, most likely because in my time, probably there was a little bit more optimism. I think a lot of our young people today worry about climate change and have some ecological eco anxiety, which I didn't have. So when I was a child, I my family moved quite a bit, and I grew up but I mean, I lived in mostly suburban neighborhoods until we ended up living in Cocoa Beach, Florida, at which time I had a lot of uh, like, I don't know, privilege of being on the beach, surfing, sailing, swimming. But, you know, before that, I was usually somewhere in a neighborhood that was being developed. And so one of the things that used to upset me back then was they were often taking down trees, you know, to make room for new housing developments. And so I used to ride around on my bicycle and untie the ribbons that I thought were intended to take down the trees. But in fact, later I found out that some of those ribbons, depending on the color, were the ones that were being saved. So I don't know whether I did more harm or good, but my intention was, of course, to protect the habitats for birds and wildlife.
Okay, and what steps did you take to pave the way towards your education or your career that you are in today? Any stories? And I mean, did you know already when you were younger that you wanted to be the person who you are today, or was your life a little bit turbulent and just by some different events it sends you where you are today, and that's what you're kind of voicing and doing?
I think that when I was growing up, I was interested in writing a lot. So I mean, I wrote a lot of poetry and kept a journal. I was an avid reader. I never really thought I never thought about psychology as a career. I certainly didn't know about future studies. I mean, um, so I sort of found my way there. Um, yeah, I took a course in college, Intro to Psychology, and I just had an amazing professor, and I fell in love with the subject matter, and like I actually had signed up for teaching, and then I changed my major into psychology and never looked back from that. And then I kind of found my way into futures, um, actually also because of another teacher. You might say I was in grad school at that time, and I met this man, Bela Banathy, who was a systems theorist, evolutionary systems theorist, and he was talking about the age of open systems. And I sort of fell in love with what he was talking about, and then wrote my dissertation at the crossroads between what I had been studying in psychology and this new age of open systems. And yeah, so it was just kind of a creative journey.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And there's a huge debate going on amongst younger people, young adults, whether the school system is preparing or paving the right path for our future and preparing us for all the unknown in the world. What's your take on the education system? Do you think everyone should go through it to find their calling, let's put it that way, or do you think people should pursue more the passion and not necessarily the academic route?
I think the education system largely, at least the public school systems, I can't speak to the private school systems because I know they're all individual, but uh, and also I can only speak to what the United States is doing, so I don't, can't speak for other countries. But I feel here that the education system is largely broken and that it's not preparing students for the world that they're going to inhabit. And in fact, one of the reasons I wrote the book was because I wanted to try to find a way to help young people learn about the ecological situation, feel more their interdependence with the natural world, and also to help promote activism among youth. And all of those things I think are very important for the world they're growing up in. Um, so I think ecoliteracy is something that should be taught to all. And I also think that I mean, it might sound a little dark, but I think that, survival skills would be important. Just basic things that a lot of youth might, yeah, they might have learned it in the scouts, and some might still learn it in the scouts and things like that. But those are important, and also just like certain life skills that you don't learn until you're graduated. That I don't know why they're not part of curriculums.
Yeah, I agree because funny enough, I've seen, I think, The Apprentice or TV show somewhere in the US or UK, and they were tasked basically of having a physical map and trying to find certain locations, and the young adults were basically lost because they didn't know how to read a map. So going to survival skills, I think it's very, very important. I mean, not just reading the map, because yeah, we're surrounded by technology now, artificial intelligence, but I think it's very important to have at least a basic knowledge of how to survive in case we are not gonna have electricity, or we lost, and how to find our way based on looking at stars or the sun, for example, etc. So it's a funny topic very much, but yeah.
Absolutely. I have kind of a funny one that I read recently that was a parent was saying to their child, "Oh, when I was growing up, we used paper maps." And the child said, "You mean like pirates?" Like their reference to paper maps is goes, to pirates and treasure maps. They don't even have that, visual of what a map was, I don't know.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're getting way too much disconnected from the reality. And that's one reason I'm basically hosting this podcast, because I want to show the younger generations the importance does not lie in being powerful in terms of monetary aspects or good looks, etc. I mean, there's nothing bad to shoot for the stars in life, but I think it's very important to learn the good aspects and normal lessons that are distributed on social media channels, which are not educating people, yeah, at least the younger generations, in a way that I would probably would want to see more and more of it. And in terms of education or career or professional paths, what advice would you give to younger people? Maybe how should they equip themselves or prepare for the future when choosing a career, whether it would be writing or studying something more mm, more academic things, etc. What tips would you have for someone if you were a parent to a child now, random child, and give them advice?
I do think that's a good question because there everything is so fragmented, and I mean, there's one positive. I mean, obviously, well, I don't know if it's obvious, but I guess I would definitely say, learn whatever you can learn at school, whatever you're being taught, and then if you have an interest, I mean, I really do believe that um, following following something that you feel passionate about, drawn to, gives you the incentive to do the work that it might take to get where you need to go. And I often think that wonder and curiosity are lost, often get, I don't know, buried in education systems. And that if, and I do speak to that in the book as well, that if you can follow a path and keep studying it, then you're more likely to wind up in a field that you really enjoy, and that your work doesn't feel like work, but it feels like something that you actually enjoy doing. And um, and I and I do think that one of the nice things about the internet is the ability that an individual can go down a pretty deep dive and teach themselves. I mean, with a lot of online curriculums that they can find themselves. But I mean, they need to make sure that it's factual.
Yeah, that's a big issue. A lot of people now believe everything that's on the internet without questioning the truth or not. Whatever is presented to us as a first option, we're most likely to take it and believe it without going into the resource route and trying to find whether it's truthful or not. So yeah, it's an interesting. I mean, we are living in a very exciting time because artificial intelligence is taking away a lot of our day-to-day responsibilities, but at the same time, it kind of disconnects us from the reality. So,
Yes,
um,
I mean, I think you touched on something there that also should be pointed out, that digital literacy is another area that should be just begun in primary school very early on, because young people don't know how to navigate and tell fact from fiction, and that's going to just become more confusing. So those skills need to be there from the beginning, because a lot of very young children are actually online,
mm,
whether it's YouTube or something else.
all right, got it. And one question: looking at your life right now, where you're standing, where you are at, and what you want to do to educate younger people, is there anything in your life or moment that you wish you could go back and do differently, or were you quite happy with how things turned out in life and where they brought you today where you are? I'm asking that question because it's always interesting to hear, especially for the younger ones. Um, it's not necessarily all about mistakes, but whether people have made the right choice or if they would had the opportunity to take actions earlier, they would. So
I
just giving
think,
them.
yeah, I mean, I think for myself, um, I would have suggested to myself to start off in a smaller college, because I decided to go to a major university at first. And having been at a small high school, you might say, going into that environment sort of sidetracked me. So I left school and then I came back later. And I feel, when I look back on things, I think, and I was advised to do that, and I didn't follow the advice that was given to me about, going to a smaller college. So that's something that I think I would advise. If you're used to a large secondary school, then maybe a large university might work for you. I wasn't really interested in being part of the Greek systems. And so when I went to university, of course, I was expected to do that. And it felt like to me, I was reliving high school with like popularity stuff that I wasn't interested in. Whereas if I was at a smaller college, I think it would have been easier to just make friends and, I don't know, stay the course the first time around. It would be interesting to see where my education might have ended up had I done that. But then again, I mean, it's hard to say that it's a regret, because, of course, I'm happy with where my path turned out. And so, you know, yeah.
Okay. And what do you think the society could do differently to support younger people? You're advocate of climate in particular. Maybe we could tap into that particular topic. What could the society do to educate younger people to be more aware of their surroundings, the world in general, but maybe also prevent a disaster that is literally knocking on our door right now and no one knows what to do really. Everyone has high hopes and plans, but they're not really being executed in the right manner, I would say, and the speed. So, what's your take on this one?
I think that youth around the world have been marching in the streets, trying to get the attention of adults, and I think that adults need to pay more attention to what youth are saying. Of course, they're concerned about their future. They're concerned, that will they have a future? What will life be like in the future? And I think that the way that adults can support youth is by actually getting active with some of these changes inside. I mean, where possible, in schools would be the first place to model the green education. And also, where possible, to get youth outside, not for recess on a blacktop, but actually in like forest schools, which exist. But I know that's a it sounds kind of utopian because I mean all schools in large cities might not have that ability, but if they don't have that ability, what can they do within the classroom to bring green education in? I mean, and that means more than just teaching like the web of life, because usually people get introduced to that through like the food web, but they really, I think what gets lost is just like, I don't know, the love for the natural world, and that if you love something, you want to care for it. And when they see adults not role modeling that kind of care, then they have a tendency to follow in those footsteps. And right now, we need adults to model to youth that this consumerist society isn't sustainable, and that's not where pleasure and happiness are found. I think you were referring to that earlier. That instead of using plastics, to teach them to use like recyclables, just basic things, composting. Again, some of the canning, growing a garden, things that 100 years ago were commonplace that have just been lost. So, fashion is another area that there's a lot of waste to model. Just less consumerism in general would be something that I think would go a really long way to changing mindsets.
Don't you think it would be a very tall order to fulfill? Because, I mean, I think a starting point, making small steps, would be maybe parents kind of pushing the educational system to make those changes for the children. But looking at the bigger picture, I mean, really the government, the corporations pushed us into that very deep web of where we are right now at the moment because we need to consume and absorb things very fast. We don't have time to think, to digest. People have health issues because of stress, because of unhealthy food. The world is suffering because we've got great technology that is eliminating a lot of tasks that could be completed by a computer, a piece of software. But it is a bigger problem. We're living now in such a fast paced environment that people are kind of brainwashed into a propaganda that we need to accumulate all these things, do things fast, and we don't have really time to digest them in a way where we think, okay, what's going to happen to our children? What's going to happen in the future? Because we don't see that far out. And it would take a big a group of individuals and do those demonstrations and interesting and incredible incentives. But as you said, no one listens, or very few listen to the younger generations because they think they're too soft. They don't have a thick skin. That's why we have a lot of depression, anxiety, because we don't feel very comfortable. So overall, I mean, if the governments are trying to make those changes at the same time is kind of the fault of the government that put us into that place. And I'm not being here like a conspiracy theorist or anything like that. Don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
but governments make a lot of money from all the corporations that produce all these things, and we import them from, like, let's say China, because it's cost effective, and a lot of things happen there, people suffering and low wages, everything. So it's a very, very sensitive topic, and I'm just curious, how do you think it could be addressed and eliminated in small steps effectively?
I think you make a lot of very valid points, and in fact, the villain inside the middle grade novel is a corporate entity that wants to keep things in the what I use the term status quo, the way things are, and I do think that some governments have more incentives than others, or try to incentivize corporations to make changes, and also people, by, for example, tax rebates and things like that. But also, a lot of times there's pushback by people when they feel that things are getting more expensive for them. I think you're in the UK, right? And there was a
Yes,
yes, and there was recently, wasn't there a whole scandal around replacing the heating units in the houses, with some
that's
people,
correct. Yes,
um, right, voting against that change, although it would actually kind of help to green the UK. So that's the problem. Sometimes, let's say, a more progressive government tries to help make the changes, but then there's pushback even from the people. But then you really don't know. Again, it's hard. They try to not put the onus on, let's say, lower income and middle income people to make the changes, because they try to bring the cost down of the item that they're trying to change. But whether it's installing solar panels or changing to electric automobiles, all of these kind of changes, they take time, and unfortunately, we're up against the clock as far as trying to keep the carbon emissions, or reduce them, and get to net zero.
sometimes I find it very amusing or funny when the government tries to pursue something towards a greener future for us, like with electric cars, because they
Hmm.
say very good for the environment. But the production of a lithium battery, for example, for a car is as bad for the environment as it would be to produce a normal car. Let's say we look or we think about a greener future, and we need to start giving the people the opportunities to eat healthier and
Yes.
good food, not the fast foods. We have chains popping up like mushrooms on a daily basis, while still the cost of eating healthy is probably 3 times more expensive than eating fast food. And
Absolutely.
yeah, I find it very sad and very frustrating that, as you say, younger people would want to make those changes, but the society pushes towards this. Okay, let's make another layer of really quick things. You don't have time to cook, prepare healthy meals, and digest them in a proper manner. You have to eat really quickly. It's quite sad, and as I said, it's a tall order, and I'm hoping the younger people will have the voice and power to overpower the current state what we live in, because yeah, it's very sad to see this, and that's why I'm trying to divert away from like the internet, social media channels, because they kind of continue of brainwashing us. I'm not being negative, I'm trying to find always some positive aspects, but I'm also cautious and aware of how badly it can influence the fragile younger people in a very short period of time. And yeah, it's unfortunately really sad to see this.
That's absolutely, yeah, I agree. It's a it's a difficult situation, and I mean, what we can do is, as you're doing, try to bring information of, how things might be able to change, and how they can make changes themselves, where possible, to not emulate some of the what we might call mistakes of the past.
Mm. Okay, let's talk about your book. You want to be put it in front of the younger people to make them better, think better, do better things. Tell me what the book is all about. Let's step inside your head and maybe you can give us a glimpse of what we can expect if we were to purchase it. When is it out? And yeah, who is it really addresses? Only the younger people, or would you also recommend it to the adults too?
Well, the book is called Future Hack. It's the first in a series, a new series called Chronicles of Gaia. And it does aim for middle grade, which here in the US is 9 to 12 age range. I would recommend it to educators, to teachers, for anyone who is interested in bringing these conversations up in classrooms. The book is fiction. It's not a nonfiction book, but it's an adventure type of book in which someone from the future comes back in time to speak to a young lady, or a 12-year-old girl at a boarding school, and she and her friends end up listening to what this young man from the future, Norbu, has to say, which is basically that there's some critical missions that if they can achieve those missions, then that will change the trajectory of the future. And so the whole series will be about these critical missions that the youth go on. In the first book, mainly they're just getting the message about the missions, and they're escaping from their boarding school, which was once a green school and has been taken over by corporate interests and is now refusing to, let them learn outside, not teaching the regular curriculum that the school was set up to teach. So those are all in there as talking points for teachers and educators to be able to bring these topics up in a classroom setting and to build curriculums around the subject matter.
Okay, wonderful. When is it out? When can we purchase it?
October 24th.
October 24th. Okay, I will make sure to add the link to the book on the video description so people are aware and definitely can buy it. It
Thank
would be really
you.
wonderful. I'm
Thank you.
curious as well, so I'm definitely going to order a copy. For some reason, I always manage to speak to people who have written a book or planning to write a book. So I've got already a stack of books that I need to read or are reading right now. But it's always interesting and exciting to be able to speak to an individual who actually published something. So very exciting and interesting. What would you say is one piece of advice you received throughout your life that stuck with you and made a positive impact on things that you're done in general?
Um, well, one that always stuck with me is life is what you make it. It's very simple, but it does pack a big punch, because it does come back to how we look at things and our own agency, our own initiative. And yeah, I'm a kind of optimist, I would say, but I do believe that, we do have power to make change. And oftentimes, as the famous quote that Margaret Mead said, it's often a small group of people who make change. And a lot of change is made. And so, therefore, um, all those things can seem dark. Um, I do believe that if young people in particular follow their passion, and if they care about the earth and they maybe direct their career towards areas where they can make impact, whether that's in government or whether that's in a technological advance that will help to, clean up the earth, whether that's pollution in our seas, or there's many areas that young people could go into, um, where in the end they might make a breakthrough, and those breakthroughs do add up and they change the course of history. I mean, we're seeing those kind of breakthroughs now with AI, and we don't know where that's going to lead. Obviously, most of these technologies are a double-edged sword, and can be used for good or ill, like most things. But I do think with the right intention that, youth, we all can make a difference in our own small way, and that, if we have the right mindset, then life is, you know, what we make it.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing this. What about a habit that you've developed throughout your life that help you achieve things? Is there a habit that you practice on a daily basis or go back to when you're
Yeah.
stuck, when you find face challenges maybe or difficulties that you would want to
Um,
share maybe?
I'm an avid meditator, and so I do believe in getting some time for silence. I also am a avid um, outdoors person in the sense of spending time in nature, which can be something as simple as just sitting under a tree. It doesn't have to be a major hiking camping event. It can literally just be getting quiet and spending time in the natural world. So those two things and combining those together, I think, have made a big difference for me. And also just reading. I mean, I love to read, and that's a habit I've had all my life. I was one of those that they had to come in at night and say, "Put out the light. It's time to sleep." So
What advice would you give in current times to younger people dealing with challenges or difficult situations? We have a lot of those. We face anxiety, stress, other things in general, because how things are in life. Let's stay positive and everything else, but let's say those individuals who are not as strong as others. Is there anything you would give them a piece of
I
advice?
would Yes, I would advise them to seek out the counsel of someone in that they do trust, that they feel safe with, that they can talk to, um, because being able to talk about how you feel and have someone to just listen, not necessary for them to have the answers, because to some of these things there are no clear cut answers. Um, but just to be heard, to be able to know that that someone cares, and there always is someone, for most people can find if they'll seek them out and sort of be vulnerable, not be afraid to share how they're feeling, and they might find that whomever they're speaking with might say, yes, I feel the same way, but that they're not looking for someone to fix the problem, but just someone to confide in and have, a real interaction where they are, um, they feel heard.
Okay, got it. Thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
Hey, so question that I always ask is there words of wisdom from each individual that you would want to pass to the younger generations? Anything that you can think of that would be very important and that could help or stuck in someone's mind, especially the younger people?
Follow your heart and don't give up.
Okay, very short and to the point. Wonderful.
Yeah.
And is there anything else want to share, through perhaps what I haven't covered in the interview, or you would want to tell others while you have the opportunity about
I,
climate, maybe because it's a big topic you're advocating?
I think I would mention something that many people haven't heard of, and it's a kind of expansion of resiliency, because in our lexicon, most of the time we have the vulnerable, and then the resilience, and everyone's aiming for this place of resiliency, which is like bouncing back to where you were before. Um, some work has been done in anti-fragility, by Nicholas Nassim Taleb, and his work. I've been applying it to psychology, and I've started talking about an anti-fragile mindset, and I would like to introduce that to young people or to anyone in general. The idea that you can not just bounce back from difficulties, but you can grow stronger from them. And, that's in philosophy. Nietzsche is famous for saying, what doesn't kill me only makes me stronger. But in our mindsets, that's often not taught to us. It's often, oh, just get on with it. You can, but because young people and adults in general are confronting a lot of change, and we've seen that with wildfires, we've seen it with flooding, um, and other things related to climate. We're likely to need to have this type of a mindset that tells us that we can grow stronger um, through traumas and difficulties. And in fact, the literature does support that. It's all kind of newer area of research, but I think that's something I would like to leave with our guests.
Wonderful. Dana, I wanted to thank you very much for taking the time to speak to me today and sharing all these interesting stories and wisdom, especially to our younger audience. I'm very grateful always to be able to speak to someone like yourself because I think, as you said, even a small change and a handful of people, if we can make a difference, that's going to make the change and difference in the future and maybe affect others, bigger groups, more people around the world. So pretty much my mission, but I'm very grateful for you being here today, the guest on the podcast. And I'm hoping we can keep in touch in the future and exchange some ideas.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with you. And thank you for what you're doing to bring awareness to these topics. It's very important and valuable.